Okay, last week. Last week we talked about the serpent, right? And what the so-called original sin was. Did we talk about that? The entanglement of the consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. Those two words that are not pronounced. First of all, are there any questions about this?
When you talk about the entanglement of consciousness, you mean, because you said it differently last week, but you mean the consciousness as it relates to the tree of life versus the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The serpent. The serpent had both male and female energy, and when I talk about the merging of the consciousness, it's an entanglement of consciousness, and from the entanglement of consciousness, the ego gene was birthed. Meaning that out of this entanglement of consciousness came anger, greed, envy, all those things, and contrary to popular belief, this was supposed to happen, and the reason it was supposed to happen. Did I talk about that last week? The reason it's supposed to happen?
No, not really.
Okay. The reason it was supposed to happen is because of the creation of this entity called Adam. And this is what I see, and you can tell me whether you see it also or not. From the womb of beginning came Elohim. From Elohim came heaven and earth. Out of heaven, what we call heaven, from the truest sense of it, came the tree of life. They are the same. And the earth, consciousness, is the same as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, in order for the entity called Adam to fully be the image of its creator, Elohim, it had to be a creator also. And once this entity called the Adam became a creator, then what is known as Adam would no longer exist, because it would be now Elohim. The energy would be transformed into Elohim. Can you see it?
So, in order for the entity Adam to become like its creator, it had to create.
Yes.
In creating, then it became Elohim.
Yes.
And because it could create, then it had to also have that choice of,
yes,
which was part of, I guess, part of deity. That's all part of the.
See, Elohim came out of the beginning with choice. If it had not, then it would not have been able to bring order to light and darkness. When it first came out, what happened? It began to bring order, right? Mm-hmm. So the same order that Elohim brought, that Adam was supposed to bring as well, by virtue of the choices that it made. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if it does not create, then it is not Elohim. And if you look at it carefully, what you'll see is that even Elohim could not create without Yahweh.
Now, in order to create, because there are those of us who create, regardless of whether we are aware that we are Elohim or not. I mean, we can create by partaking more of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You know, we can create, we have two choices.
Yeah.
So we can use both choices to create in a sense.
Yeah, yeah, right. Of course we can. But I guess we're talking about creating responsibly.
Okay.
Creating
Right.
in the way that Elohim would create for the benefit of others.
And the reason I question that is because you said in order to create you have to be Elohim.
Right.
But,
In order to create responsibly.
okay.
In order to create as Elohim created. Because if you look at the first chapter, there's no mention of Yahweh. There's no mention of Lord in that first chapter at all. It's the pattern laid out. And when you get to the second chapter, around the 7th verse, that's when it picks up with Lord God. And it goes from that point all the way through. And the Lord God said, and the Lord God did, etc., etc. But all of it is Lord God. Which says that and this is probably a very poor choice of words, but I can't think of anything else. The animation of what was in the mind of Elohim was given life by Yahweh, because Yahweh, when you look at the first chapter, it's like a pattern being laid out, and when you look at the second chapter, it's like the pattern being brought together. Can you see that? It being given life. It's like laying out all of these things, these animals or these objects, and all of them are inanimate. And the place where they're laid out is not on ground or on a table, but they're laid out in the mind or in the essence of Elohim. And when Elohim becomes one with Yahweh, as Jesus talked about, one with the Father, that's when these things began to manifest and become the life begins to animate them, and that's when they are put in a position to make choices, and before the choice was made, the opportunity was already there. And the reason I said it had to take place is because if it were not supposed to take place, why would Elohim be plural? One yet many. So it had to be for the benefit of more than one entity.
All right, stop right there, please, sir.
Yeah.
So, out of the serpent, because of the entanglement of consciousness, came jealousy. The ego was birthed.
Right, yeah. Selfish gene, yeah.
The selfish gene.
Yeah.
Is the selfish gene many?
Yes.
All right. So it produces after itself in a sense.
Right.
Okay. And so Elohim then is out of the consciousness of the tree of life. Elohim is, and this, for lack of any other words, Elohim is the birther of the God gene, whereas in a sense, whereas the ego is the birther of the selfish
gene.
Okay.
And
And so maybe that's why, because it had to give birth to others, it had to be many and one.
right. But look at this. It's the same thing as the human. The human is one yet many. Humanity. One yet many. One yet many. So humanity and Elohim are the same in terms of one yet many. And the creative activity that takes place between the two of them is just different in that the Elohim is like and the human has opportunity to become, to be rather, what Elohim is by virtue of the choices that it makes. When we choose to migrate towards the selfish gene, or when we choose to be selfish or greedy or experience all those things, then we are, in essence, tied to or have a greater affinity, or developing a greater affinity for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But those things of joy, those things of pure pleasure, and those things of the ideas of giving for the benefit of all, that's when we're tied to the tree of life. That's when that's holding on to the branch of the tree of life. Can you see that? So the more the human does that, the more order the human brings into the earth. Ron and I were talking earlier today, and one of the things he was talking about was the amount of chaos that we begin to see. And I believe that since we came together a couple of weeks ago, it's just the light has been shown more so on this chaos than ever before. I mean, these guys killed this Australian dude because they wanted to see somebody die.
But we talked about that though. I mean, it's almost like it's hitting us. But we talked about the fact that with 2012, there's that opportunity for so much exposure of light,
right?
And that it would expose darkness. But you really, we talked about it, but you really don't think about it until you see the manifestation and the evidence.
And one of the statements that he made was that this is just silly. This stupid stuff people are doing. Mm-hmm. My response was that it's not stupid. Not at all.
For security purposes, this call has been terminated.
It's not stupid at all. It's what has to happen. And it's not something that has to happen as much as it has been taking place all the time. But now the light is exposing, what's transpiring under the shadow of darkness. Then the guy who kills the feminist and takes the girl. They got the lady and the man who are in Vegas who were making plans to kidnap policemen and torture them to death. Because they say that the police have no authority over them, and they bowed out the Social Security system, and the government sets up a trust fund in everybody's name at birth, and you have access to that fund, and they won't give that kind of stuff. I see Jenny's frown with that, but you'd be amazed at the number of people who are involved in that movement, and one in particular,
That's what I was thinking when you said it. I was
Yeah.
just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that's that's the kind of chaos that has to be exposed. Now, why does it have to be exposed? Because order has to be brought to it. If you can see the atom as being in a huge basket, in a basket, just all these thoughts, right?
Oh yeah.
Just all these thoughts in this basket, and the basket is atom. And now the basket makes the choice as to how it's going to arrange these thoughts, arrange these words to make sentences of, how it's going to do that to bring things into fruition. Well, the atom chooses not to do it the way Elohim did it. It chooses to do it its way. So in actuality, the atom is an unfinished product.
Question.
Can you see that?
Question.
Yeah.
You said earlier on that the atom is no longer the atom once it becomes the Elohim.
Right.
So you mean the atom as many is an unfinished product.
Yes.
And some of the parts of the atom have transitioned to the atom as Elohim. But it's not until everybody.
It's that spark
Okay.
that has become a part of the flame.
Okay. So,
When we talk about the Enoch type thing, it's the spark that has become a part of the flame, the
so there are
raging
some of
fire.
the sparks from the atom that have become part of the flame of Elohim, but
Yes.
the atom still is an unfinished.
Product.
Okay.
So how do we? What is it been?
I was gonna ask, will it always be, that's okay, go ahead, I lost my word, go ahead.
Okay. If you get it back, just and see, we know it's the truth because we talk about the cycles of life. We don't talk about life being linear. We talk about that life is cyclical. You get that word? That cyclical. Yeah. And which means that everything that goes around comes around. So we're constantly moving and moving towards the light, but nothing ever ends. Because there is no ending to a circle. It just continues. And when we talk about the earth itself is a sphere, which is circular. The planets, except the sun, all these things are there to remind us how everything is continuous and how we live in a continuous process of quote unquote spiritual evolution. And as we evolve spiritually, the evolution of it moves us further and further away from recognizing who Elohim is, or further and further away from who recognizing who we are in terms of the atom. Because what happened is the whole concept of religion has served to pull a shade over Elohim, or put a wall between the human and the Elohim, the human and the God. Can you see that? Because in essence, the religion itself has become the God that's being worshipped. And the representatives of the religion are the ones who are being worshipped, as opposed to allowing the human to see the Elohim, because when you see that, you're actually looking in a mirror. So what religion has done has taken the words in the book, whether it be the Bible or whether it be whoever holy book it is, it doesn't matter. They've taken the words of the book and they have literally translated them when it's convenient, and spiritually translated when they don't know what it means, or made an attempt to do it anyway, or say stuff like, well, you're not supposed to understand it all. This is the difference. The difference is when you can say what's on the page literally, but you have to understand what's there. The wisdom is in the book. When you read it, it's wisdom. But it does you no good if you don't have the understanding. Better sheep of Elohim, that's wisdom. It began and created the heaven and earth, right? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Right? That's the wisdom. Now, what does all that mean? That's the understanding. The idea of the Adam and the Ish and the Ishah and the garden eating the fruit, right? That's the wisdom. But what does it all mean? Because it could not be separate entities. It could not be the woman over here and then the man over here with space between the two. First of all, it's spiritual, so it couldn't be space. But secondly, when God makes the call in the garden, he says Adam, where art thou? It doesn't say Ish or Ishah, so he's calling the one entity. It recognizes that one. Can you see that? That one entity. So it's not. It's like Janice said, well, you know, a part of me wants to go to Spartanburg, but another part of me really wants to go to Charleston. That's the same principle that took place in the garden. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. But in the wisdom of it is trying to understand that in order for the tree of knowledge of good and evil to reproduce, it has to have spiritual, it has to have feminine and masculine energy, just like the tree of life does. And the whole idea of blaming someone else for what happened is no different than saying, the devil made me do it, or, you know, I didn't intend to do that, but I did it, or I wanted to see how it was going to turn out, or if I say that Betty made me do it, or if it weren't for her, I would be feeling like this, I'm actually blaming myself. So, but we try to cast the blame away from us, as it happened in the garden. The woman that you gave me type thing, always trying to blame someone external of who we are, and as a result, actually clouding the mirror, so you don't really see who you are. Clouding the mirror, so you don't see what's real, as opposed to what isn't. Clouding that mirror, so that the wisdom that you read in the holy books actually becomes an opportunity for the man, or for the human rather. It could become an opportunity for the human to build a kingdom unto itself. Last week when we talked about the idea of climbing the steps, you remember that? And Danny raised the question, but I talked about falling down the steps, and he talked about climbing the steps. What happened to the child who climbed the steps on his own? And that was a metaphor being used in relationship to moving to a elevated consciousness. And what I saw after we left was there is a classic example of an effort to get to this elevated consciousness without the benefit of recognizing the tree of life, and the method of getting there was exemplified with Nimrod in an attempt to get to the elevated consciousness with Nimrod. And if you look at what happened with Nimrod in the Tower of Babel, what you see is he or it initiated this effort on its own, as opposed to a Moses being summoned to the mountain, or as opposed to Abraham being encouraged to leave the place of his birth, etc. You see, if it is not initiated from the spiritual realm or from the tree of life, if it's not initiated from heaven, if it's not initiated from the light, then it is darkness seeking to elevate itself. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that the movement that we, I'm sorry, that the desire rather to gather the sparks is not an effort for us to gather sparks for the benefit of us, as opposed to being initiated from the other realm, which means that the gathering of the sparks is for the benefit of mankind. Can you see that? So the vessel, when we talk about, as the sages do, the vessel shattering, and I think we have in our minds something like a glass dropping to the floor, but the shattering of the vessel is a scattering of the thoughts. And we talk about being scatterbrained. We talk about gathering our thoughts so we can make sense of things. That's the same, excuse me, that's the same principle that's involved in this whole concept of the shattering of the vessel. And the sparks of which we speak are not the sparks as we see literally that comes from the striking of a match or the kindling of a fire, but the sparks that we speak of is that knowing, or that light that flickers. Every now and then we have a glimpse of what is. Every now and then we have a glimpse of of the direction we're supposed to be taking, and the greater the desire we have, the more we're able to see with the eye as opposed to the eyes. So the effort is to return to beginning, and the question is, what happens when we return to beginning? The idea of giving, receiving to give, will still be there, but to whom will you be giving? And what happens to this thing called earth consciousness? No.
Question.
What is it?
Beginning gave.
Uh-huh.
So did beginning give in order that it might experience receiving? Because if we return
Absolutely.
to beginning just gives.
Yes. And now,
So I'm back at your question, and I
yeah.
don't know the answer.
When we get to beginning, we would have experienced what it feels like to give, because it takes the giving in order to bring the sparks together, sharing. Before the vessel was shattered, before the intermingling with the energy from the tree of life, tree of knowledge, the atom didn't know what it meant to share. Only thing it knew was to receive. And it wasn't selfish, but it didn't know anything else. But when it was introduced to something else, then that's where the selfishness came from, the intermingling with that tree of good and evil. When I made the statement about what happens when we get to beginning, what happens to this earth consciousness? Well, we're told.
It's not needed anymore in a sense.
Well, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. You see? So it's talking about a earth consciousness that has been purified, that has been brought to And when I say purify, I don't mean it in the classical sense that we use that word, purity. I'm talking about order, more or less, has been brought into being. And the mutation of the spiritual has come to a place of what has halted. And at that point, all the thoughts have been brought under submission to the tree of life. Any questions about that?
Why the need for the new earth? Is that a process kind of thing?
Suppose that the reason the need for the new earth is so that the being that was the Adam can do the same thing that Elohim did. Bring into being other.
So the issue is not, I'm thinking physical, but this is totally not physical.
Right. It's a total, well, it's a circle. So the Adam becomes, let me put this out there. Suppose for a moment that what we are experiencing is 5, 6, 7 cycles, whatever. And the other cycles were complete and brought those sparks back, right? And that Adam now is doing the same thing. It's no longer Adam, but Elohim now is doing the same thing that was done in the beginning. And we are part of that whole cycle that has to come to fruition. Does that make sense? Suppose that's true. And then after we are complete, then it starts all over again. So what's the point of it all, right? I have no idea. I have no idea what the point of it all is.
So is that, sorry. So is that why you say, I might use the wrong word, Adam is open? Is that why you said?
Yes,
because it's
yes.
continually getting sparks in
Yes.
it. And then through the others, this is what I'm saying, through the other side, it's sparks coming through and going to Elohim.
No, not going so much going to, but becoming one.
Becoming, yeah.
When I talk about the Adam being open, I'm talking about Elohim, the Adam, the him. The Adam was a prototype that was supposed to develop into the image of what created it. But rather than develop into the image of what created it, it began to develop the images that it desired. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And suppose that those damn images that it desired are the images that's supposed to become the Adam, recognize that it is the Adam rather, going awry and become the Elohim, and then this process starts all over again. Because nothing ends, does it? I mean, so what's the point? What's the point of it all? Anybody know? I mean, when you think about it from that perspective.
I'm not telling.
Okay, keep it to yourself. You mess up the whole thing. Janice.
I remember Nick taught about primates that were starting to walk upright.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but wonder, if we aren't the only ones evolving. And what does that mean?
Well, everything that we brought life to, as we know life. If we evolve, it has to. I mean, there's it has to evolve. And my sense of evolution is not the sense of evolution that we talk about in the earth consciousness. When I talk about spiritual evolution, I'm thinking about those entities evolving in a way that it returns to its source. Everything returns to its source. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about evolution from a spiritual perspective. I'm not talking about evolving in terms of becoming more mature or more like something else, or a frog eventually becoming a man. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about a return to the source.
Question.
Yeah.
Has the universe stopped expanding?
No.
No.
No. If the universe stops expanding, we die. Yeah. And not only is it still expanding, as Richard says, it's getting faster, but it also is pulsating in terms of breathing. That's a heartbeat. So without what's happened with the universe, we don't exist. Or without what's happened with the universe, no, without happening with us, the universe doesn't exist. So we're dependent on each other. Okay, you can jump in any time, Nick, Sheldon.
Got you slipping that limb.
I just wanted to add, I posted something on it was a short story written by somebody named Andy Weir. I think that's how you say his last name, but I posted that on my Facebook wall a while ago. But the story, the title of it is called The Egg. The Egg is the title of it. In the story, somebody dies in a car accident, and he wakes up on the other side and he meets a guide, and he's like, "Oh, I was just killed in a car accident. Okay, that was kind of anticlimactic." And the guy is like, "Yep, but you're gonna go back." And he's like, "Why am I gonna go back?" And the guy says, "Because you're not finished yet." And the guy eventually goes on to tell him that every person in the entire universe is him. And he has to learn how to bring balance to every possible experience that could be experienced within the physical universe that he just left before he graduates. And once he brings balance to all of those experiences, then he no longer needs the physical experience, and he can finally learn why that was even necessary in the first place. And so the egg refers to the universe itself. And I believe that story resonates very much so with the reality of what we are experiencing. So we can get glimmers of it, but we don't really know it until we do it, until we're there.
So that's why this chaos that we were speaking of earlier is necessary, because we have to bring balance to it. But the balance that we bring to it is not the way it's being dealt with by society itself, in that we're talking about, if you look at the political or the social society, it talks about arresting people, or it talks about rehabilitation, but rehabilitation to what? To the human experience again. But then when you look at it from the religion, it talks about being a member of the church, being baptized, etc. That does not bring balance. I do not believe that we can bring balance through physical action at all. Balance is brought through spiritual desire. And in order to bring balance through spiritual desire, we have to be able to face adversity without blinking. We have to be able to see what we call a senseless murder as a necessary act to spark us to move, to bring balance. What we call senseless events are actually events to motivate us to do what needs to be done, or sit on the sidelines and allow things to spiral out of out of control to a great extent. Because it's not going to, nothing is going to get better, whatever we call better, until the human recognizes it is time for the human to bring balance. The one we call, that we reference as God or the Father or Yahweh, the source of what He is not going to do anything at all to bring balance. Nothing. The only thing we receive from the source is wisdom and strength. That's it. There's not going to be any intervention whatsoever in what goes on in this earth realm. None whatsoever. Other than the wisdom and the strength to do what needs to be done. And if this generation, and I don't mean generation in terms of, 20-year generation or 40-year generation, how you count. If this generation seeks to do nothing, then this generation can end up the same way as it talks about the generation of Noah. And I believe that the generation of Noah was an end of a period. And we're facing the end of a period. And how we approach it is totally up to us. How we deal with it is totally up to us.
Can the human bring balance apart from the awareness and understanding that it is Elohim?
No.
Okay, so,
No.
okay.
See, the imbalance not only came but is perpetuated by religion. The imbalance is perpetuated by those who say that God is out there and you're in here, and you have to call on God to change your life. That's not going to happen. And the thing that got me, I was talking to George earlier in the week, and he was telling me about, I suppose it must have been yesterday, because he talked about Thursday night at the coffee shop. This guy came in, and during the course of the discussion, he made a statement that, well, the Bible says we God. Yeah, and from what he said after that, that was the reaction of everyone, like, whoa. It seems as though that everyone is beginning to recognize that we are God except the church. So it is the very one who is supposed to, or who you would expect, I should say, to not only plant but cultivate the seed of the recognition of us being Elohim, are the very ones who is killing the seed. And until that structure is confronted, nothing changes. And it's going to have to be confronted by humans who are not afraid of the consequences. who are willing to suffer whatever consequences or endure whatever consequences that come as a result of challenging that system. It must be challenged. And the challenging of it is not so much in your face as it is by the way we respond to things, that events in our lives, by the way we answer questions that are raised with us, regardless of who's asking the question. We have to be open and honest about it, by virtue of us recognizing the energy that we are, and the energy that flows from us as a result of our coming together for whatever purpose. When we came together for racism, a couple of weeks ago, I don't think we really recognized the results of that yet. The results of that has nothing to do with racism. The results of that has to do with all of the chaos that we see, exposing all the chaos that we see, because there is no greater chaotic condition in the earth than racism. So I think it had more to do with that than I was sitting back waiting for racism to quote unquote end. So that's what I gotta say. So that's pretty much the direction I was headed in last week. Getting to the place where we realize that of who we are. I'll tell you something that happened to me last week. On Monday night, I taught this principle to the class on Monday night, and what I taught was, out of beginning came Elohim. And I taught, pretty much what we talked about earlier. And they got it the first time around, without any, without me having to answer, a zillion questions. They got it. So how is it that they got it so quickly? Because the cultivation has taken place.
We already struggled with.
Yes, right. The cultivation has taken place. Now it's time for us to look at moving from understanding who we are to the guidelines that were given to bring us to a place of a greater awareness. And when I say guidelines, not only am I talking about what took place at Mount Sinai, but I'm also talking about everything in between that and after that. Because the guidelines at Mount Sinai were given to Moses. You remember when everybody was supposed to come to the mountain, and when Moses came down from the mountain, they were asleep. That sleep is talking about them being so caught up in preparation for meeting or for being with the Creator until they lost sight of what they really were supposed to be doing. We're so caught up on getting ready for something until we lose the essence of the thing that we are making preparation for. That's always there's always a negative that's lurking as a positive. The other thing that we have to be cognizant of is not getting so caught up in rhetorical intellectualism until we lose sight of the reality of spiritualism. Can you see that? Because we can intellectualize stuff today. The spiritual, spirituality is more about living a life that we were designed to live than it is about learning something. I told my class Monday, in response to something that came up, when someone asks you what you learned, and tell them nothing, absolutely nothing. When they ask you what's being taught, tell them absolutely nothing is being taught. The reason you're not learning anything is because it's already there. The reason nothing is being taught in the classical sense of teaching is because revelation is taking place. It's an uncovering. So no one is learning anything. And to carry that a step further, that's how we fall into the pit of intellectualizing by virtue of seeing it as a learning experience as opposed to an experience and that's it. This is not a learning experience. This is not an opportunity to learn what's in the book. That's not what this is. This is revelation. This is peeling back layers. This is uncovering so you can see what's already there. And when we see it from that perspective, then we begin to see that truly the student, for lack of a better term, is far greater than the teacher. Because there is more revealed to the quote-unquote teacher by virtue of unveiling what's there with the student. And questions lead to revelation. And I do believe that's why we have in our religion a distaste for being questioned. Questions lead to revelation, but you actually rocked to sleep, or you put into a coma when you don't question. It's like outside of that structure, you have every question in the world about everything that goes on. But as soon as you cross that threshold, you shut down. Because we've been conditioned not to question. And the funny thing about it is that the connection is not being made to the person who tells us not to question. The connection between that person and God has not been made. Because if Janice is the covering in that particular setting, or the pastor or whatever in that particular setting, and I ask a question and she says you don't question God, I'm not asking God. I'm asking you. But we back off of it, but the person is actually saying, I'm God. Don't question me. And subconsciously, that's how they get treated, as God, without being questioned. And that's what puts us in a coma. Makes us afraid to raise those questions. Regardless of how strong you feel about a subject, you just don't question. And I was speaking with this lady who called me during the week, and we were talking about the gathering that we're supposed to have next week for our class, and some way we began to talk about church and scriptures and stuff, and she made the statement to me that I don't get anything out of going to such and such a place. That's the church she goes to. And I said, the reason you don't get anything out of it. No, she said, it confuses me. And I said, the reason it confuses you because the one who teaches you confuses. That's why it's confusing. And then we got into basic stuff that she did not understand, like what it means to be saved, baptism, born again, all these kinds of things. And she was pretty much shocked at it. But what struck me is that someone who has never known anything except a traditional setting and is very well entrenched in it, were raising questions outside of the norm for those who are entrenched in it. And the person who will raise the questions, I know very well. We grew up together. And you would never expect that person to question anything. So that spoke to me, it spoke volumes to me, that the energy is actually flowing. And is actually not only flowing, but it's also influencing thought. It's influencing the human to look beyond what's being said and seek something else. So.
Interesting. I was on Facebook the other day. Well, not the other day, last night. I saw a post from my niece, Ryan. And she was saying that very same thing. She was saying, why is it that when people who are sitting under these settings start to ask questions and they start to be ostracized or termed the troublemaker or whatever? And she was saying, something's got to change.
And that's the energy. And see, think about that. The people who are raising these questions are not the people who stay away from these settings. These are the people who are real in these settings, have deep roots in these settings. But guess what? The answers are coming from people who are at the coffee shop. That's who's seeing the answers, as opposed to those who are entrenched in those settings. We have these split personalities because we don't want to take responsibility for ourselves. We don't want to take responsibility for the choices we make. We don't want to take responsibility for the results of the choices we make. Everything that happens is someone else's fault. And that started from the time of the vessel shattering. And it has not changed. It hasn't changed. It's always someone else's fault, no matter what happens. So we have to begin to take that responsibility for ourselves. And please know this, it doesn't take 1 million people seeing in order to change 1 billion people. It really doesn't. And when it talks about, and 10,000 shall fall at your feet, that's not talking about somebody worshiping you. It's not talking about you killing anybody. It's talking about awareness, bringing awareness. That's what this is alluding to. The falling is actually the falling away of the scales that's on the eye, so that they can see. And that's what we do. If they can't see, if they can't have their first vision through those of us who say we see, then how will they have it? Because we're afraid to respond to the questions that are raised, or to say things in certain places. So it is up to us to eradicate the influence of the serpent, the Satan, and and bring about balance in this world by virtue of subjugating the ego. If the ego is not subjugated, then the purge of selfishness does not take place. Questions, statements, comments? Because I'm about
I was
to.
going to say that last week when we talked about the serpent, we talked about how the serpent brought in the doubt by asking questions. And then I mentioned my niece asking questions. Well, I think you just answered it a little while ago when you said that, you said something to the effect that if it's not coming from the light, then what was the other part?
If it's not coming from the light, it's darkness. Basically, is what I said.
If the motivation is not from the light, then it's coming from the darkness,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's what Jesus meant when he said, if your light is dark, then your whole body is dark. That's exactly what he was talking about. See, the vessel does not come together by virtue of moving parts. The vessel comes together by virtue of subjugating the ego. By subjugating the negative energy. By forcing it to submit to the light. That's how the vessel reunites. It's not. It doesn't reunite the way that we think it does. Because when we talk about being together with the same energy flows, one thing that seems simple, and I could go down a list of things that have transpired in this way, but one thing that seems so simple is about virtually the same time that Janice was talking about being a vegan, so was Kathy, and then coming to find out so was Audrey considering it. So where did that come from? And there are a number of things that we have done or we've observed that has transpired by virtue within those who have been close to each other, not just this group of teachers and stuff, but people, period, when they're close to each other. What happens? These are the things that began to change. So, subjugation of negative energy results in unconditional love for your fellow man. Subjugation of ego results in unconditional love. Make sense? When we talk about loving ourselves, we are also talking about each other, unless you place yourself above someone. So, there was something else that came to my mind. Oh, I know what it was. You know when we were talking about adultery and how we dispelled that whole thing in one of the settings that we had about adultery. I saw something else. Adultery. If everything in there is spiritual, then adultery has to be spiritual, right? When was Israel referred to as an adulterous nation or people, whatever? It's when they began to worship other gods, right? The whole idea of adultery lends itself to being intimate, doesn't it? So the same intimacy that took place in the garden with the light and the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, when we talked about the intermingling of the consciousness? What does Israel mean? Those who were ruled as God, right? So why were they adulterers? Because they were repeating the same thing that took place in what we call the garden experience. Can you see that? They were intermingling their consciousness. They were the ones who were seeking the light, and yet they were falling prey to the worshiping of other gods. Can you see the difference? I mean, see the same thing? That's the same principle. And if you can see that as being the same principle, then if we meaning those who are seeking the light, not just in this room, if we were to fall in line with the religious settings that we know of, or go along just to get along, then we are also doing the same thing, committing adultery. Are we not? Now, you can only commit adultery when you are married to something, right?
Right.
So that means that those who were ruled as God are married or committed to or one with the Creator. Can you see that? And now they are opening themselves up, the womb up, to darkness and calling it light. So if I am portrayed as someone who is seeking the light, and I began to intermingle with the religious and began to perpetuate that, now what I have done is produced after my own kind, because there will be those who will follow. Because some will say, you know what, that must be right because he said it. And there are people who do that all the time. Thank God you know. So the idea of adultery goes beyond what happened in the garden. I'm sorry. The idea of adultery carries us back rather to what happened in the garden experience. That was the first adultery in the garden experience.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I can't recall exactly what. You hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you scared him.
I have a question. It was a word, the Aramaic or Hebrew word that actually dealt with that we've been using wrong in religious circles, and it had to do with not knowing who you are. And I can't remember if it was heretic or not. What was that word? Was it blasphemous? You don't have any idea what I'm
I'm
talking
trying to
about.
think. It was blasphemous. Because we're blasphemous, that's what it was. Because we were talking about blaspheming the Holy Spirit, the sin. That's what it was, it's blasphemous.
Okay, well, you can continue. I'm saying something right quick. I couldn't think of it. Appreciate your help, sir.
Okay.
No, it's tied to what we're talking about.
Okay, that's one of those other things you say, what's the purpose of all this? Okay.
Yeah, I give that to you to say.
Oh, okay. All right. But that's what it was, blasphemous.
Thanks.
You're quite welcome, sir. What were we? What was I saying? You're talking about adultery, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So, it says that
So what is blasphemy? It's when you deny.
the power, deny your connection to the power. There's a source of life.
And the fact that you were created and you were intimate, and so blasphemy also is a type of spiritual adultery too.
Yeah,
It's the ultimate.
that's what he's talking about. Yeah. Spiritual.
I was about to say, she saw the connection.
Well, when you lay it out there like that.
Yeah.
But what I was doing is I was going back to Blue Letter, and I wanted to find the Aramaic versions of the word to see how connected they were, and that would actually explain a lot, because I mean, in the traditional sense that we thought of the two, they were two very, very separate things. When, you know, once you lend the two of them closer together, it brings a lot more understanding.
In that the whole concept of adultery is epitomized by what we call religion. So the scripture says that the adulterer is to be stoned to death. Doesn't it? So what does that mean? Does that mean that Israel, being an adulterous nation, was supposed to be stoned to death? What does that mean?
Nick, that was on
Nick? Nick?
Remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago when I talked about that verse in the Gospel of Thomas where the fire would come out of the stones.
Yep.
That's what it means.
And what was that again?
Okay.
You and Sheldon been drinking the same quick?
Yes, they have. Seriously, Nick, we need a little more than that.
So, in the example I gave back when I mentioned that, stones were, in the example, Thomas learned something that the others were not aware of, so the others would have tried to, quote unquote, stone him with their own understanding of what it was, what that was being spoken about. But Thomas said, if you do that, the revelation of what that you are saying actually means will be made known to you, or will manifest itself in your awareness or your understanding or your experience. And when it does that, it will burn you, essentially. So it will purify the ignorance and the ill intent with which you said those things in the first place, and that will be potentially a painful process. So the stones themselves were the truths, quote unquote, that they were flinging at Thomas, thinking they knew what they were talking about. So if an adulterer is to be stoned, what that actually means is one who is ignorant of whom what they are must be taught that they are acting out of ignorance.
And based upon that, go in your mind to Leviticus and walk down the list of who should be stoned. You see? Just go down that list of who should be stoned.
Who's not on the list?
There. Thank you. So based on what he's saying is that it is incumbent upon those who are seeking the light or walking the light or the light to bring those who are unaware of their circumstances to a place of awareness. That's what it's actually saying. So when you go down that list of who should be stoned, you'd be amazed at how you're supposed to respond to that, and how we're doing just the opposite. If you go down that list, you will find that religion shuns all those people. Think about it. does nothing to bring understanding, does nothing to bring them into the fold. It shuns all those people. It was no different than a doctor shunning those who are sick. Because you don't understand what's going on with your body. So he's going to shun you as opposed to explain to you what's going on. That's the same principle. If you go down that list, those are the people who are outcasts to the church. Isn't that something?
So say again then the definition of the term to stone is ask the
It is
librarian.
fill their empty heads with knowledge.
Bring them to the awareness of their experiences.
Feel their
Yes.
empty with God. I like that one.
No, what I'm just thinking, what was running through my mind was the literalness with which this is translated, and you have situations like we know go on in Afghanistan with the Taliban and stuff. So you have the
And-
same concept in the Quran,
Yeah.
interpreted, misunderstood, misinterpreted, because it's taken literally, and it's thought to be a punishment, not a cure. That way. Or I have to kill you to save you. I guess
Yeah.
it's the
And see, this is the thing about that. Whether it's the Quran or whether it's the Bible, that you will not find anything in the scripture where God punishes. It's not there. It is not there. So this whole idea of the stoning, it's just what religion does. When I said earlier that when you translate, or when you look at it literally, you don't have the essence of what's being said. I guess as the sage would say, when you read it literally, you literally a fool. Because there is, it is, you must have literacy when it comes to the scripture. And just because you can read doesn't mean that you're literate.
Do you know who said that if you read it literally, you're literally a fool? Or where does that come from?
It's one of the sages at, what's it, Lori?
I want to use that.
Okay. Yeah, you got it.
No, I was thinking about the translation of the scriptures and how, what's literally written on the page has been filtered through religion and manipulation. I don't know how you can get much. You can't get much from just the surface because of that.
Well, it's like you saying, well, you really don't know me. What you know about me is just surface stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Same principle.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they really get to know you, they really don't like you.
For yourself.
But it's always about digging deeper.
Yeah.
It is. And the thing that gets me is that the ones who are the Sufi, the Sufi or the sage, the shaman, they are the ones who are not talking about stoning people. They are the ones who are in the background who you never hear from. But the ones who speak the loudest are the ones who understand the least. And maybe that's what it is, an empty wagon make a lot of noise. So, back to what Janice said about the filtering. That is one of the reasons it is imperative to look at it from the original. And looking at it from the original is still filtered. Yeah, So that's where the third eye comes in. And we call it resonation. If it resonates with you, that's what makes it real to you. And that's how we have to deal with it. It's like this guy who sits in my class says, you know, when I'm sitting here, all this makes sense. When I go home, it doesn't. And my question was, why? Because I can't explain it. Well, you don't explain it the way I explain it, because you're not me. You have to deal with it the way it resonates with you.
And his words are the main thing. Makes sense.
Yeah.
He goes home and then he tries to understand it from his senses
Yeah.
to make
Okay,
it make
yeah.
sense. And it can't be understood that way.
And
Yes.
yet, he accepts it.
Well, but it
Yeah.
resonates when he's sitting there.
Right.
I mean, it you know, the vibes are the same.
Yeah.
But then when we go home, apart from it, we try to overlay our own meanings. What's that mean? Blah, 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 blah.
And seeing it through the eyes of what he's already been taught. Then beside that.
Yeah, it sounds like he's trying to make it literal in this way that you were just talking about.
That's that revelation thing. It's not being learned. I mean, when you think about the stuff.
I agree. You're right on, Sheldon. That's it. Sorry. You go home and you try to say it the way Pastor said it during Foundation, Nick said it, or somebody else said it, and it comes out like Tower of Babel.
Yeah. Well, and that
Because it is Babel.
and it's
Because
supposed to.
maybe you got it, but probably not. You just had a fleeting sense. Otherwise, why would you not
See,
get it? You don't get it and lose it.
It's not the words that you get. It's the concept.
Yes, yes.
It's the concept.
So you're getting the words, and then you go home and blah, 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 because you
Yes.
can't.
Or
You
you
didn't
try
memorize.
to understand it, you try to make it intellectual, and you try to put a box on it, or you try to put a definition of what is it that I know now instead of just taking it.
And
Exactly.
Yes.
And a perfect example of that is an example of that, in my own experience anyway, is when I started teaching. When I first started teaching, I was nervous. I didn't know what to say because I was trying to remember things to say. And I don't have to remember anything. I absorb all this information, but I don't worry about remembering it. I worry about
Did I say it right?
feeling for the source of where the information comes from, because that allows me to put all the pieces together. And when you approach what is in yourself in that way, every time you speak, it's renewed, it's refreshed, it is a new thing.
Yes.
And it's kind of like the old the Akashic records a little bit, if you've ever heard that. And what that specifically is more than what I'm applying it to this example about, but all you do is just get in the right mind state, and then it flows naturally.
Yes.
And
But
that's the same thing as when we are in a class setting in the natural, we are taught to regurgitate as opposed to absorb. If you don't put it on the paper, what brings to mind Clark. In Clark's math classes, she could write the answer, but she didn't do the problem. And she caught hell in class from the teacher. So she could not explain how she got the answer, but she was doing the answers in her head. I mean, doing the formula in her head. And the teacher thought that she was copying until she settled down in front of her and she gave the answers, and it still wasn't enough for her. So she doesn't know how she got it. I asked, how you do that? When she told me, I don't know, but the answer just come. Then she said, well, you know, I don't know what happened with her.
No, I was going to say, I mean, there's several ways, I guess, to think about it. If you've written down what's been said, you go back and you look at it and say it as an explanation if someone asks you, well, we say this to each other all the time in here. I missed Foundation, what did y'all talk about?
Yeah, right?
Is it just me? Okay.
No.
Anyway, well, maybe it is. I should sit in a certain place, I guess. But anyway, so you go home and you go, oh, here, okay, I was smart enough to write it down, so it was, you know, to stone means blah. And then, so it's kind of like, no pun intended, a touchstone.
Yeah.
You know, if you hold on to that, you have some sense of understanding of what was said. But then if somebody takes that away, you find out if you really absorb that or not. And I mean, my head's full of quotes from people that Einstein, people that I respect and stuff. And there are a lot of times when I don't get the quote right, but I can say what he said. And then when I hear myself say it, I say, was that the essence of what he was saying or not? And you self-examine if you want to say, okay, I don't have to say it exactly his way, but to me that's the meaning of what was being said. So in a way, I mean, I can see how
And I
it's
think
a
that
test for whether you got it, I guess. To a certain extent.
that's the reason there are different people talking about the same concept. And when I say different people, I'm talking about not just Nick Sheldon, Barbara, not just all of us are talking about the same concept because we receive differently. When it's uncovered, you see different than I may see. There are things that I talk about that I never thought about. Even sitting here today, there are things I've seen that I've talked about that I've never seen before. But where are they coming from? Nick said it, feeling the source. But it's a step beyond that too. Trusting the source that you feel. Because if you don't trust the source that you feel, you struggle. And you doubt whether or not what you're saying makes sense or true or whatever. So you have to trust the source that you feel.
So does that relate to where God told Moses, "You open your mouth and I'll speak for you"? And the sources. You want to talk?
Pretty much the same thing, yeah. You did. It's like praying. I'll speak for you. Who's speaking for you? Elohim. You're speaking. That's what it is. Praying. Who you praying to? You.
To that point, you've made used the example before about the holy men and sages from all of these different religious sects. But once you get to the truly top, not the material top, but the true top of the people who are actually going into themselves to find out who they are and uncovering that. All of them throughout history were saying the same exact thing all over the world, but just in different words. If you get to the heart of the matter and basically, do away with all the surface things, all of them saying the same exact thing, but just from a different point of view.
Which means you have to shed that foundational religious perspective. Once you shed that, the truth is the truth, regardless of what avenue you took to get there. I have sheep that are not of this pasture, flock, or whatever it is. So it's simply saying there are different ways to get to the same truth. And again, religion actually bastardizes what Jesus said when he says that he's the only way, the way, the truth, and the life, that he's the only way to get to the Father. That's not what he was saying, and they're actually bastardizing it. And when you do that, you are using the name in vain, the character of it, the essence of it in vain. And the danger of that is this: when you use the name in vain, it's actually talking about using the name or characterizing things that, using the name for things that are unimportant, like praying at a football game. For what? You pray that you win, I pray that I win. So God care more about me because I won? Yeah, that's trivializing it. Now, this is the danger of that. When you do that, when you really need it, there's no power there because you have emasculated. You've taken all the energy from it. You made it something that is not. Because the power of it is actually dependent upon the confidence you have in it. Can you see that?
Well, I think that if you reflect on the term gives you the clue. If you use the Lord's name in vain, what does in vain means? Try to lift up 1,000 pounds with one hand in vain.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it. So you're wasting
The energy.
But we make it, and then we tie this to the notion of being blasphemous, and then we get the word evil and bad and all the negative stuff in there, which weighs you down instead of just telling you, could have had a V8. I mean, it's just you're just wasting.
Get 100 out of bed.
So there it is. I mean, it's in vain. It's pointless. It's really what you could say another way to say it's using the Lord's name pointlessly.
Yeah.
To take some of the stigma off of that sort of cursing you for talking that way kind of thing. Get all that baggage out of your face and just say it's pointless to talk like that.
Since you said blasphemous again, I'm back to blasphemy.
Great.
I know your head was. The original blasphemy then, based on what we said, because blasphemy is to cut yourself off from the source, in a sense. And so the original blasphemy is me not knowing who I am, or me accepting all this other stuff and not going within myself or trusting myself to know who I am. So in a sense, you could say you're committing adultery with yourself, in a sense, because John talked about blaspheming against the Holy Spirit. Well, the blasphemy is cutting yourself off from the source of the breath of all life. And every time I breathe, to deny who I am is in a sense blasphemous, because I'm not acknowledging. I mean, how intimate is that to breathe? How intimate is that? I mean, that's life itself.
Yeah.
And when I don't accept or acknowledge the God that I am in so doing, that's totally, we all are blasphemous until we come to that knowledge.
So we're holding our breath. Right.
I don't think you're going to hold it long enough.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? And why would you want it? But think of how the term is used when it's thrown at somebody.
What term is used? Blasphemy?
Yeah, how could you then imagine that you'd want to burn somebody at the stake because they were being blasphemous? How's that educational? How does that help them correct?
That'd be burning all of us, just about.
But I mean, how does that help somebody see the wrong, so to speak? You know what I mean? See the error, see the missing target. So the stuff doesn't add up.
But the burning is not for the person who burns, it's for everyone else,
I know what I'm saying.
right?
It's-
Yes.
The burn is all about terror.
Control.
Yeah, manipulation. If you don't do what I say, you next. And let me throw something out. Barbara just made a statement about breathing and breath, right? And that's what we are, aren't we not? So, if that's what we are, then would it not make sense that when you leave this body, you still breath? That's what we are, right? So suppose then, since that is true, that we are breathing in the essence of those who've gone before us. That's what we are. When we breathe, we're drawing that essence into us. And the essence that you attract is based upon your desire. That makes sense?
I will go further
Thank you.
and say that what you just spoke of is already there, but when you desire it, you actually are able to draw on it, but it's always there. When Jesus is talking about he was here before Abraham and all of that stuff, it's already here. Well, it's you basically.
So
Not just here, but yeah, it's you.
So,
the source that you're talking about. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But the source that you're talking about, that Nick was talking about earlier, all of that's already there and available right now. And when I say available, even available make it seem like it's right here beside me and not me, but it's accessible within yourself, because it is yourself. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for permission. So when Barbara sees Miss Florence, it's actually a manifestation of what she's already experienced. It's a visualization to undergird the experience or the understanding that you seek or that you have. So it's a message in every moment that happens. There's a message there, and the only reason you see that image is so that you can associate something with it, because that's what you're familiar with. So that image is presented to you, and as a result of that, you may not even recognize what you inhaled from that experience, so to speak. You may not ever recognize it, but it's there. Now that we're talking about it, you may be more cognizant of it the next time you have that experience, and you may be able to see that connection. It's like if we've talked about if someone cuts you off in traffic and you give them the finger or you say things, then next week you lose your job. That's, you don't see that connection. You don't see that connection of that negative energy. But that's the same thing it is with that presence that we experience during the hours that we are actually awake, but we call it asleep. That's the experience I'm talking about. So could that possibly be the concept that's involved when, I just remember who the writer is, who talks about the caravan of saints who goes before us? If the caravan is before us, that's our past, right? Then when we inhale, we're drawing it to us. So could that possibly be what that writer had in mind? Or maybe not, knowing what he wrote at all. But in essence, that's exactly what it is. Not so much of you catching up with the caravan, but you inhaling the essence of it. And that word inhale is really, really a weak word for what I'm talking about.
Well, it's a good metaphor, I think. That makes me wonder, is air ever created or just renewed? And I'm thinking of air as a metaphor for spirit. It's all here.
Yes.
All the air we have ever had and ever will need on this planet is here. And so the whole concept of pollution then is something that interferes with the ability of the spirit, the air, to be renewed through this whole ecosystem. And you can make an analogy, the ecosystem being a spiritual mix.
Yeah.
And then now that's the genius in meditation, at least in the beginning, of having you focus on breathing, and breathing fully. You know what I'm saying? So, because most of us breathe from our upper chest, and learning to diaphragmatically breathe so you get all the oxygen possible. And then after a while, when you meditate, you forget all that. So I just see how that's all very...
It's all interconnected.
So
I tell you one that you might not want to hear. That all the water that's ever been here is here, so you drinking dinosaur urine.
It does a lot of good, doesn't it? Why are you being so diplomatic? You're drinking your own.
I ain't been long enough.
You know what the Prime Minister of India did anyway?
Yeah.
10 years ago?
Well, I'm not drinking my coffee. I ain't being long enough to get back to it.
Me neither.
Well, you got,
but really-
you got a million molecules in you that were in Hitler's body.
I mean, all these things are interconnected. Everything is, and the key to it all is us. That's the problem. We are the polluters. We do it, and we are the ones who purify. So the pollutant is the whole concept of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the purification is the tree of life. Why? Because what you're actually doing is bringing life to something that has been contaminated. And the contamination has nothing to do with what we call dirty. It has nothing to do with that at all. You know, our concept of something being contaminated is an abysmal thing, but that's not it. The contamination that we're talking about, that we're dealing with, is an opportunity to be who you were created to be, Elohim. To bring order to that which is not orderly. Not just the chaos that we see, but the chaos that we experience. And the chaos that exists that we don't experience and we don't see. But we are the source to bring that to order. And when you really think about it, we talk about the source of everything that is, don't we? Well, we are the source of everything that is in this universe, in this earth consciousness. We are the source of it. The Creator didn't make this. We did this. We made this table. We made this desk. So we are the source of everything that is here. And since we're the source of everything that is in this consciousness, that ought to give us a greater sense of who we are in terms of being a creator. But the problem is that we become the worshiper of that which we create.
Yeah.
That's the issue. We serve it as opposed to it serving us. And we become the servant because of the things that we want, that we see that we have created, but we say others created it. We become, and what happens is those things, we have such an affinity for those things until they become more important to us than very life itself. Or if they become more important to us than the whole idea of coming to a realization of who we really are. We're so attached to, it's almost like we birthed it, so we don't want to sever the umbilical cord. And we want more and more of it because we think it's going to please us, but pleasure does not come from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Pleasure does not come from earth consciousness. You're wasting your time if you're looking for solutions in your mind. They don't come from this consciousness. Solutions come from the other side. Diane.
Okay. The scripture that came to mind when you were talking was, they that worship me must worship me in spirit and truth. This question rose up in me last night. With that scripture, how do we worship the essence of the truth of what we now know versus how we worship the God that we have created?
Gotcha.
Know what I'm talking about?
Yep, gotcha. Okay. First of all, worship means to submit. So what we are worshiping is ego. Selfishness. We submit to that. But when we subjugate ego, that means it serves us. And when it talks, we are to submit to, when it says that they that submit to God, they that worship God must worship God through spiritual truth. The God that we're submitting to is Elohim, submitting to who we are. That's what it's talking about. Submitting to who you are. So when you submit to who you are, it simply means that you have come into an awareness of who you are, and that's what you seek to experience every day of your life. As opposed to getting so caught up into the gods that we created until we are submitting to them. And see, the them that we are submitting to is not so much the type of car you have or the amount of money you have, it's your ego. Because those things are the things that feeds your ego, that makes you feel like you're superior to someone else.
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
So I remember we were in a meeting, and this guy who was an attorney stood up, speaking of another guy who had gone to school with him, said that this guy was a painter in New York, and he retired and moved into my neighborhood and built a bigger house than mine. That was nothing but ego. And he sounded like he was kind of teed off that he did it. And the guy was sitting there, like dumbfounded, because it meant nothing to him, but it meant everything to the other guy. You see what I'm talking about? That's submitting to the things that we have, as opposed to the things serving us. I got phone calls during the course of the week about last weekend. The number of people that flowed through that place last weekend. And the thing that I liked about it the most is that no one felt uncomfortable. No one felt like, well, should I sit here, or should I do this, or is it going to be okay if I, if I take this or sit there and do this thing? That's the thing. Why? Because the energy there says, this is yours. Not mine, not ours, in terms of feeding me, but this is yours. That's what I'm talking about. Recognizing things for what they are, but at the same time, recognizing you for what you are. Not so much as a who, but as a what you are. The last thing that I want to say, unless the other guys have something else, or you all have something else to say, I came in contact with an effort to determine what gender the Creator should be referred to as.
Really?
Okay.
And I figured it out. I saw it. And it says, should it be feminine, masculine, or neutral? My response, what do you think my response was?
Either feminine or neutral.
My response was it. It should be referred to as an it. Yes. I just like to see their face when they read it. The reason isn't it. It's because it's not neutral.
Mm-hmm.
It's male and female.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
It's not either or. So when that came across, it spoke to me again. That the energy that's being put out there is causing these questions to be raised in places where you never think that they would be raised. And the response to them have to be the response of truth, so that we are indeed submitted to ourselves. This is what I'm saying. If I knew that the answer should have been it, and I put neutral because that's okay, they ask that question, or if it's going to make them feel better, or I'm not going to hurt anyone's feelings, then I am not submitting to who I am. I'm submitting to who you think I am. Does that make sense? When you submit to who you are, you don't say what people want to hear just because they want to hear it. You might get put out of a lot of places. And you might get excommunicated sometimes from your family. But it's okay. You have to be true to who you are. I'm done.
So is this a multiple choice question? And you wrote in the answer?
Yeah, I wrote in the answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was multiple choice.
That's a trick question.
It
You
didn't have
asked
a
us which of the
space,
three,
it had a
and I'm
space
like,
down, right?
oh.
And I typed it in the box. Because you had a space for explanation. And I typed it, I put it in the box.
Trick question.
Yeah. Now, had it just been, the three in terms of the Holy Spirit, I definitely would have said family. But they were talking about God. And they asked the name that you make reference to God. That you use to reference God. And of course I put Elohim. Yeah. So then I put it in the box. Elohim equals one but name. The word Elohim is plural.
You did?
So okay. Any questions? Okay, Nick, I guess you're up.
Actually, next week I will be working on Saturday.
Okay.
So next week, well, for those who don't know, I started a new job. So I will work occasionally on weekends. I'm also moving next week.
Oh.
Man, you do a lot of stuff next week.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll work it out then during the week.
Okay.
We'll figure it out. Okay, you going downtown?
Oh, no, I'm watching on TV.
Okay, I tell you, probably can't get down there anyway. Okay, if that's it, Bargy.
The truth of the light that we are and the light of truth that we are reminds us that we must subjugate ourselves to the Elohim that we are and be.
Amen. Okay, see ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.